I could care less about the quantity of people we've served, right? Sure, on our website, there are numbers because people see numbers and that matters, right? But for me, if I know that we have served, 50, 60, 70 kids in Gaza for a whole duration of 6 months, that for me matters so much. If I know that we have hired 10 teachers to, number one, have some sort of a salary, but more so a sense of belonging, right? A sense of purpose, a sense of hope in the middle of a catastrophe, that matters, right? And the driving force behind Art of Hope is to give hope and belonging to not just the beneficiaries, but also the teachers, the caregivers.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Third Culture Therapy, a podcast that explores the ways our culture and heritage impact our mental and emotional well-being. I'm Leila Marabi, host of the show. Today, I'm joined by the incredible Tara Kangarlou, an award-winning Iranian-American journalist, author, and humanitarian whose work has taken her across the globe. Born in Iran and based in the UK, Tara has reported extensively on international affairs, humanitarian crises, and global conflicts for major news outlets like CNN, Al Jazeera, NBC, and more. She's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University and the author of The Heartbeat of Iran, a deeply personal and eye-opening portrait of life inside her home country. Beyond journalism, Tara is the founder of Art of Hope, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting refugees through art therapy and mental health programs. I'm so excited to dive into Tara's journey, the impact of storytelling, and the complexities of identity and belonging. Tara, welcome to Third Culture Therapy.
Thanks so much for having me, Leila.
It's a real pleasure. I'm very, very excited to enter into this conversation with you. And I want to start how I always start with my guests. How do you most closely identify?
I always say I'm as Iranian as I'm American. I think if you hear me on the news or, you read my writing in English, you might think that, I was born and raised in the US and, I'm even second generation, but I'm not. I was born and raised in Iran, and Iran is my home, is my roots, is my soul, and I will always be Iranian, and I'm extremely proud of that. I moved to the U.S. when I was 18, but constantly went back and forth until I lost my father, and that was the same year that I started working at CNN. And Leila, I decided to give up my ability to freely travel to my home because I wanted to do free journalism. I wanted to do storytelling on issues that you and I care about and are vital, right? And with the knowledge that I will most likely not be the most welcome person back, right? And that was a very
tough, I can imagine. Must have been a very tough
difficult decision, but a very cognizant decision.
Yeah.
And so, that was a sacrifice I made, and I hope it was worth it, but I'm proud of it. So to answer your question, I learned a lot from my adopted country of the US, but I'm Iranian and I will always be an Iranian woman.
What has your access been like to Iran since you left?
So, like I said, I was born and raised in Iran. And so from an early age, I had a huge network, right? In my community and in various social channels. I would always travel freely to the country until I professionally became an American journalist, right?
Right.
But of course, my contacts remained. And I'm very proud that I was able to lead and support Al Jazeera America's coverage of the nuclear talks. I was in New York at the time. It was 2015. And it was the first time that I went back as a professional sort of working American reporter. That was a bizarre and different feel. But suffice it to say that I'm very lucky that I still have the trust of my sources. I'm very lucky that, I lived and experienced that society from the core. So people can talk to me at any time, regardless of whether or not I'm in town or, back home.
I can relate to the decisions that you made, although I did something slightly different. I'm partially Syrian. My mother's Syrian. And of course, as you know, Syria was very much in the news for the better part of a decade because of the civil war, uprising turned civil war. And I did have this point at which I thought, do I, as a professionally speaking, lean into Syria because obviously I'm connected to it and all of that. But kind of then deciding, well, I weighed up that would mean potentially denying access to it on a personal level. And I actually I'd made a different choice. Of course, we have different circumstances, but I don't think I could have handled not losing it. I think personally, I found it just too much of a cost that I didn't want to pay. But I do appreciate very much the difficulty of making that decision.
I don't know if it was my idealistic and naive mindset. I just wanted to be a good journalist. I wanted to be a good storyteller, and I had the opportunity and the privilege to do that.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about your life growing up. Those first 18 years in Iran, what was it like?
I was extremely privileged to have a beautiful life. I had a beautiful childhood. Despite the challenges, right? The sort of duality of life, Layla. And if you read my book, or anyone who has read my book, so much of the themes that come up are constantly grappling with this duality of life in public versus life in private. And how have people, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, have maneuvered, right, within these restrictions and confines imposed by the government, right? And my interest was always trying to pull out the human and humanize the Iranian people who I grew up with. I was part of that society, and my work has always been focused on humanizing individuals on the ground in an effort to understand whatever goes on in the societies that we're discussing. And that's precisely what I teach at Georgetown. And that's what the Heartbeat of Iran was, Layla, because as a professional, American journalist, producer, whatever, in the legacy networks, we focus so much on the headlines, right? And we focus on news events. And sure, we will package a story, try to add in the human voices, but really, Layla, there's no room for nuance, right? And context. And so much of the world is packed with nuance. So much of the world is packed with isms, right? And Iran is one of those countries. The Iran that I grew up with was not monolithic. The Iran that I grew up with and know and is today even is complex, is textured, right? There is no linear narrative that you can define and see this country through. And so, I wanted to translate my experience into the Heartbeat of Iran. And that's why it was born, because I was so tired of, explaining my own identity or how I grew up within this very modular paradigm. Yes, I had to wear the hijab or not, or, I could be arrested or not. I mean, these big questions that I always faced as an Iranian woman. But there's so much more, right? There's so much more. And that's why I spent 3 years of my life, again, doing the Heartbeat of Iran as the first nonfiction book, really, that allows our Western audience into this tapestry of life, right?
Have you heard of the silk hair wrap company, Paradise Fold? I've been using their 100% silk double-layered reversible wraps and turbans for years. And if you love your hair, I think you're really going to love these too. Beautifully designed, snug, and luxurious, they're the ticket to hydrated, healthy, frizz-free hair. Culture Therapy podcast listeners get a special 10% discount on the Paradise Fold website with the code TCT10. After such an illustrious career as a journalist across, leading international networks, you write this book, and then what is it that made you decide, though, you wanted to shift more into humanitarian work?
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I think so many of us still feel we haven't done much, and I'm.
Oh yeah, I think this is the affliction of our age, unfortunately.
You're always as good as your last story, and I was also tired of that because I didn't want to just produce numbers, or your show has to do with mental health, right? And authentic conversations around around these nuanced topics. And so for me, the teenager in me who moved to the US always found myself having to explain my identity. Okay. I always had to explain, no, I didn't, I didn't ran from Iran. I'm Iranian. And I always was proud of that. And so I always wanted to find a sense of belonging, right? And connection, because I felt connected to my counterparts in the US, even though I grew up in Iran, even though I was an Iranian girl, right?
Yeah.
And that always came about through storytelling, right?
Yeah.
And bringing people together. And so coming back to your question of leaving journalism and moving toward the humanitarian front, maybe that was part of the reason that I cared so deeply about the people that I reported on or their stories, because for me, they weren't just numbers, right? I couldn't leave people who I would meet and just come back to New York and be done with it, right? And I always cared a little bit more. I always cared to go back. And so I launched Art of Hope. It was 2016. I was extremely angry seeing everything I saw in Lebanon, because I spent a lot of time there since 2014. And if you remember, 2014, there was a fall of Mosul. A lot of Iraqi Christians fled. And then there was a huge influx of Syrian refugees into Lebanon and Jordan and also Turkey. The situation in each three countries differed enormously from one another, and Lebanon was the most complicated. It still remains quite complex. And every single story I did, Layla, whether it be education, political stories, healthcare, work situation for the refugees, I ended up feeling angry that, hey, there can be solutions to these huge problems on a grassroots level that are not being addressed. And in every single story also, Layla, I couldn't help but to think about the enormous trauma that these families and children that I've interviewed are going through. Mm-hmm. And nobody at the time was focusing on mental health. Nobody was focusing on, any effort when it came to psychosocial support. And so I came back to New York. I wanted to do a story actually on this immense need for mental health. And there was no research, there was no research. There was no work done. I remember Save the Children had this report with maybe 70 people in Turkey as their sample. And I just found it a bit odd. Right. And I thought, you know what, I am not going to resolve this global crisis, but if I can, utilize my resources in the field, having known a lot of mental health professionals in Lebanon, okay, and put them in touch with the beneficiaries that I also know, then maybe something can happen. Some good can come out of it. And that's how Art of Hope was born, because quite frankly, I was angry and irritated at big organizations and INGOs, and I fundamentally believe in the power of grassroots, Layla, and I've seen impact, and so that's how we started work. And now we are active in in Eastern Ukraine, inside Gaza, which I'm so proud of. We have done work in Lebanon, all across southern Turkey, and so on. Yeah.
Why did you specifically choose art therapy of all the potential, modalities out there?
I remember actually the inspiration behind Art of Hope and art therapy. I was in Beirut. It was 2015. And I was doing a story on the multi-layered challenges of education for Syrian refugee. And I remember with a friend, and I mean, sources become friends and friends become sources and so on. So she at the time was a friend, but she was a source for me. And we went to this small apartment in the Sabra Shatila camp, refugee camp, which, is home to hundreds of Palestinian refugees who've been in Lebanon for many years. Yeah. And so this family of 5 was living in this super tiny dark room. And I was interviewing the mother about their journey from Syria to Lebanon and the challenges that her children are facing when it comes to, access to education. And at the time, the little girl, she's 11, Rula, she was drawing whilst I was interviewing her mom, and it was dark. There was one lamp, and I had some crayons and markers and so on, and she was just drawing. And I remember her mom's story. She said, either my children would be kidnapped by militants or the regime, or killed. And we had no choice but to flee, and we fled overnight. And my children, including Rula, have nightly urination, and they have a lot of anxiety and a lot of challenges and so on. I did the story, but stayed in touch with her family, as I did and have done with so many other families. But I also kept Rula's drawings, and I came back to New York and also stayed in touch with my source and friend, who also happened to be a therapist and an art therapist, and she used to do rehabilitation work for jihadis and extremists in the prison system in Lebanon. And I remember I asked her, I said, listen, if what you do works for men who have done very bad things that you and I don't agree with, how about we do that for children, who fled war and ISIS? And she said, yeah, we can do that. I said, okay, let's do it. And so really that was Rula's drawing. Yeah.
That's wonderful. It's a beautiful story. I think what's beautiful about what you said is that it began and ended with the people in need. So you were guided by what you saw there in front of you, as opposed to making decisions in an office somewhere very far removed that, maybe even with the best of intentions, just doesn't have anything to do with the reality on the ground. And I wonder, just sort of thinking out loud here, if that is perhaps why you find a lot of journalists, maybe it's just the ones that I've heard of, but quite a few who do kind of enter into humanitarian work, either alongside their work or after, because they've actually been there and seen, and kind of get to a point maybe of realizing that the storytelling part is not sufficient anymore. And that if you do genuinely care, and a lot of us have entered that profession with that sense of wanting to leave the world, a bit of a better place than we found it. And you're actually witnessing, and you're seeing, and you're experiencing. And then because you have so many connections, because of the nature of the work, right, you get always exposed to all types of people. You're not in one particular lane. You get a fuller picture of what is really happening. And so I imagine if you're someone who's like really, you care and you're kind of proactive, to just leave it at that of a copy, it would be hard to do. Like I in the end, I was like, I can't anymore. I need to do something beyond tell the story, especially since, even telling the story becomes quite a challenge, depending obviously on where you're from and what angles, etc. And editorial lines, and that becomes a different scenario. How have things evolved with Art of Hope? Where did you start? Where are you now?
Sure. First of all, excellent point you raised. Journalism, as so many people know, it's not the most lucrative profession in the world, right? So you go in it with various intentions, right? And if your intentions are rooted in bridge building, the power of storytelling, empathy, bringing people together, and standing truth, and be the eyes and ears of those who can't share their stories, then those are good qualities and good values. And also seeing the power that the grassroots can do. And first of all, with Art of Hope, I could care less about the quantity of people we've served, right? Sure, on our website there are numbers because people see numbers and that matters, right? But for me, if I know that we have served, 50, 60, 70 kids in Gaza for a whole duration of 6 months, that for me matters so much. If I know that we have hired 10 teachers, to, number one, have some sort of a salary, but more so a sense of belonging, right? A sense of purpose, a sense of hope in the middle of a catastrophe. That matters, right? And the driving force behind Art of Hope is to give hope and belonging to not just the beneficiaries, but also the teachers, the caregivers. And also, I think, again, another reason grassroots operations work is because they know the needs of the communities. They know the needs of the places they operate and they serve in. And so the first year, we started with our Beirut team, the suburbs of Beirut. We supported around 100 children who fled ISIS, but also we did family intervention. I focused a lot on terrorism and counter-violent extremism and so on. And I believe, by the way, that the focus on rehabilitation work and PSS, psychosocial support, should not just be on women and children. It has to be on men. It has to be on teenage boys. It has to be on husbands. It has to be a collective. It has to be a family effort. So that's something that I wanted to make sure that we, follow through with. Is it easy? 100% not. But, have we done it? Yes. And so we've done programs across Lebanon for 6-7 years. We do emergency relief sessions, we do workshops, we do summer camps. In southern Turkey and northern Syria, the earthquake that happened 2 years ago, we spent about 4 months deciding on how we want to go about this, Leila, because we're dealing with a population, okay, in southern Turkey, in Gaziantep area, that is now traumatized again, right? Re-traumatized. They fled Aleppo. They fled the war in Syria. Finally, they're having a, semi sense of stability and then done. Okay. That's dangerous. And so we spent 4 months trying to figure out what to do. And then at the end of the year, we ended up supporting around 60 adults, okay, men and women with CBT, and a very bespoke programming. So for us at Art of Hope, I in particular spent a lot of time, Leila, digging into the problem, okay, understanding it fully, and figuring out an in-need community that can benefit from a bespoke program, okay? And so every single program we do differs from another. For instance, in Eastern Ukraine, we've had an incredible team of educators who do music therapy, art therapy, meditation, and so on with a group of 90 kids.
Obviously, I'm familiar with your work, but like the detail that you've now given is really shown just the extent of sort of depth that you go into. And it's quite a lot of work.
And again, listen, we operate on a tiny, tiny, tiny budget, which also makes me laugh, but also makes me angry, because if I can do what we do with, $5, $10, $20,000, then I wonder, others who have a lot of money, what good they can do. So, again, it goes back to why you're doing what you're doing. And that matters. Okay. There is also zero need to recreate the wheel, but a whole lot of reasons why people have to join forces. Okay. And we tend to not do that because, again, of the intentions. And that's why I precisely care about grassroots and locals, and zero interest in big organizations. There's another, reasoning behind it is that mental health, Leila, and again, I'm sure there are more astute experts on the topic, but in my very humble opinion and experience, mental health is not a tangible thing, right? So I can't count the numbers. I can't count and tell you, Leila, sure, I can tell you the partnerships we have, the missions we've ran, the people, the number of students and beneficiaries we've had. But, it's different than from saying, oh, Leila, Art of Hope has built 200 schools and have hired, 1,000 teachers across Jordan and Lebanon. that's interesting. That's sexier to, donor nations than me trying to convince them that, no, listen, 100 children matter. And, and the trauma they're facing and the experience will endure generations because it's not visible. Okay. It's not tangible. And I think one of the biggest challenges and reasons in tackling and dealing with mental health and psychological wounds of war and displacement is this lack of tangible aspect of it. And then on top of that, listen, I think it's a huge taboo. It's still an enormously underserved area. It's an extremely privatized space around the world, especially the Middle East, in addition to, of course, being a taboo topic. And lastly, one thing I would say, Leila, is that, again, this can definitely be rectified and improved, but there is a huge deficit of emotional literacy. Okay, and that's another area that Art of Hope has been active in. We have these fantastic cards that were created by a dear friend of mine, Joy Marchese. She's an educator, and her philosophy is embedded in Adlerian philosophy, in positive education. And she created these positive affirmation cards, to precisely instill emotional literacy. And we've translated them into Arabic with two Arabic psychologists and social worker, and we've been using that in our field. There has to be, whoever is interested in rehabilitation work post-conflict needs to do education in tandem with psychosocial support. You cannot expect children who have seen the most horrific atrocities have access to education without adequate mental health and rehabilitation and psychological support.
There are definitely changes that I've witnessed in the last decade or so, but not only socially, the awareness around mental health much greater, people speaking about it in media, etc., and also in INGOs, understanding there's a lot more of this psychosocial support inserted into programming. I can't fully assess, whether good or bad. I've seen variations of, but I can at least speak from a social perspective, a public media one, which is that there was, in my mind, a lot of limitations to the discussion, much as it was welcome. What criticism, if any, you have of the fact that, yes, you are seeing more of this discussion happen in the INGO space? Is it complete in your mind?
I want to preface by saying there are a lot of great people out there who are doing great work. Okay, whether on the UN level or INGOs or various donor countries and stakeholders. So I want to definitely give credit to those who are doing the work and are trying hard. Mm-hmm. I know how difficult it is. However, based on my experience, when I talk to counterparts in the US, especially in the US, there's this sense of, top to bottom, right? Oh, we should go there and help, or we should go and, impose our version in an effort to support. And you cannot do that. You cannot, especially when it comes to mental health and, psychological support. You need people from their own community supporting that community.
Yeah.
I've had people in the US I'm sure with great intentions, thinking that, they can go and do 3 months of therapy. It's not going to work. You can't be, white person from Chicago or California and, go to Lebanon. But the fact that is that professional individual's understanding, I think we need to change that as well, right? I think we need to instill this, reality, and we need to educate people that, listen, our intentions are great, but if we want to be helpful to the communities that need support, we need to empower those professionals and mental health workers in the field rather than wanting to go do the job. We need to have them understand that you can be a facilitator of change. You can provide support differently, but the final work has to be done by those in the field. I would get angry at people who want to, give laptops or iPads so I can take them to Syria or Lebanon. I'm like, no, 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 please don't give me laptops or iPads. Give me the money so I can go hire the professionals in the field, or I can give them scholarships to continue pursuing educations and such. But good luck convincing someone in, again, I don't know, whatever, LA, New York, that no, their idea of these children having access to this laptop and app or this AI thing or teletherapy, no, that's not going to work.
I wonder how much that's got to do with this general sense, in particular in the Western world, of wanting, this focus on fixing things. So it's like full circle, like we've completed, like, here's my stint and I've done it, and like tick, because the alternative to that is living in the difficult space all the time and negotiating that. It's a little bit like, it can happen, but let's say you go to therapy for a specific issue and you're like, cool, I've heard this with different people. I'm going in for 2 months, 3 months, I'm going to tackle this issue and then I'm out. And then I laugh now if someone says that. I'm like, cool, let me see what you say in 2 years, because the reality is it's multi-layered, it's multifaceted. Sometimes you'll go in for a bit, you'll dip in, then you'll dip out. Sometimes you go there, but then you need 6 months to process what you've just learned, and then you have to go back. And so it's never going to be tied up in a neat bow, and you can be like, cool, my sense of achievement now has been gained by the fact that I can say I fixed this person. Like, the whole outlook of it needs to kind of be reconfigured. But it's a much more uncomfortable and challenging place to occupy, because you're never done, and you may never get that sense of like entire sense of like, great, I accomplished this. You just got to kind of do it because you ultimately believe in it, and that's a hard space to occupy.
I never feel accomplished. I never feel like I've done anything. And this, again, I'm being so transparent, and viewers and listeners, I'm being very truthful and honest and real. So I'm always extremely hard on myself, and it's never enough. But the one thing, just quickly on the previous topic about, the Western world wanting to help in this very delicate space, I would say one word, Layla: humility.
Yeah.
Humility goes a long way, and I think journalism humbles you. I mean, at least to some people it is humbling, to others it's not. But humility goes a long way.
Yeah.
That you don't always have all the answers, but if you can help others find the answers, then that you've done your job, right? You've done something. If I can, as Art of Hope, help those who have the answers find each other and put them together, then I've done the work.
But I think that often has a lot to do with the world, maybe the worldview one occupies. I think when you really do see and believe that everything is connected, I think it's just easier to operate that way. Whereas I think if you see us operating as these like individual microcosms, then it's a whole different outlook. Then you are looking at numbers and achievements and success and tick. Hey, are you enjoying this episode? Well, let us know. In fact, better yet, let others know by sharing the show with them. Follow Third Culture Therapy Pod on Instagram, YouTube, and Substack, and listen to the show on all the usual channels. Now, where were we? You've had a very expansive outlook from a young age, and then you moved to this entirely new culture and continent, and then entered a profession that is all about constantly exposing yourself to other things. But we've spoken about the work you do for other people and to try and help their mental and emotional well-being, and working both as a reporter and as a humanitarian. And how do you find it impacts you? And I wonder if is there any difference in the way that you felt as a reporter being exposed to certain stories and very traumatic situations and people versus sort of similar maybe context but different, similar circumstances but different contexts within Art of Hope?
for me, journalism and my craft was something that really humbled me. It's humbling. For me, it's a privilege.
Mm.
And I take that very seriously. I am extremely idealistic. Um, and I believe in kindness. I believe in people, and those are my driving force. Okay, I've also experienced a lot of loss personally. Okay, from a very young age. I've also experienced the loss of my home country, right,
Yeah.
because of my work, and so I understand loss. I understand grief. And I also understand how people can connect. And you're right. I see things from a very micro lens, but I can also see things from a very big macro perspective simultaneously. And I think a lot of that has to do with how I grew up and, the places I've been and the work I've done. Um, but it's hard, but I'm aware of it, right? I'm aware of it. And so, I tell my friends about my own experience with therapy. I tell my friends to seek therapy. I also try to find softness in my personal life. I try to bring color and beauty into my personal life because otherwise it hurts. Otherwise it's painful. And also, listen, it may to some sound cliche or silly, but to walk the walk, be kind and be real and be authentic and also see change in the small steps, Layla.
Mm.
I do believe that there are a lot of good people out there who want to do good, but they think they have to take these profound big steps.
Yeah.
And I don't think that. I think you can be a force for change with one small step.
It's such an important point you've just made, and one I try and remind myself. It's very similar to you, obviously by background, but yeah, always want to do a lot, care very deeply. And I love those elements, but they are very challenging and it's very painful. It is, and the losses, they come and they come and they come, and you keep having to somehow endure and process and maybe make good of them. I think one of the biggest things that has changed in me as I've gotten older is the recognition of these small steps, as you say, and recognizing that it just because it's little doesn't mean it's not impactful.
Yes. Yes.
You never know where it's going to go.
Of
You actually
course.
just don't know where it's going to go, which is beautiful. We obviously mentioned this at the beginning that you left Iran, went to the US at 18. And then there was obviously a bit of a fracture between you and Iran because of your professional work. And obviously the many changes Iran has been going through politically and socially that may have also created that distance. But I'm curious to know you touched on Iran and Iranians being possibly one of the most demonized and dehumanized population, especially in America, right? Which is where you ended up studying and living and working and also gaining the citizenship of. This obvious external conflict between America and Iran, how does that play out for you, being both?
Okay, well, I was actually born an American citizen because both my parents were U.S. educated in the late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
And so I was born with this American passport. And so that was that. And I would travel to the U.S. when I was a child. I would travel to Europe quite often. And so for me, there was no difference. But then I realized when I moved to the US that, hey, there's a whole lot of difference for my counterparts who have only seen my story and have heard my tale through a monolithic narrative. And that story is not necessarily mine. And this is what I tell my students. And this has become sort of my tagline, which is, you don't tell your story, someone else would tell that story for you. And that story may not be one that you like, nor one that's factual. And there's a danger to that, Layla, also. Okay. So if the world is looking at Iran and Iranian people through this extremely dehumanized narrative of this narrative of, the hostage crisis and angry ayatollahs and, presidents that you can't even pronounce their names, then there's something wrong with that. What that does is that creates fear. Okay. Right. There's fear, anger, and rage ensues. And there is this inherent disconnect between the two sides. And I soon realized that, oh my God, my counterparts in the US know nothing about the people of Iran. Okay. Ordinary people. And so I, unlike so many other Iranian Americans, I never shied away from saying I'm Iranian. I mean, there's this whole discussion about Persian Iranian. I'm Iranian and I'm from Iran. And if you think of the word Iran synonymous with, the supreme leader, I'm sorry, that is wrong. And you are responsible to correct that. You are the ambassador of your culture and country and heritage in lieu of having an accurate representation. Okay. And for me, it was always that. And quite frankly, Iran and Iranians are also extremely misrepresented in the Middle East. Listen, I always also had a whole lot of trouble traveling in Lebanon and trying to always conceal my Iranian identity. I mean, I'm now trying to, for instance, go to Syria, and I'm like, okay, it's gonna be like Lebanon. And I am Iranian, but I have nothing to do with the Iranian government or this group or that group. Yeah. So this monolithic narrative and monolithic views that the world sees you and your community, okay, has to be challenged by you and your community alone. And you are responsible for that because nobody else cares and nobody else has the tools, resources, and facts to give that colorful account. Okay. Yeah. And I always try to challenge that and be an ambassador of, my culture and country as best as I could, of course.
Do you feel that was a burden or a privilege or both?
Okay. The word burden, it is a privilege, but I wouldn't say a burden. I wouldn't choose the word burden. I would choose the word responsibility. That's how I felt. I'm responsible. And maybe if I didn't feel responsible, I would have a jolly good life with a whole lot of less emotional challenges and easier life.
But that responsibility, I suppose, just to dig into it a little bit, because, to explain, I suppose, to others the impact of that. Because, we've had this chat before about like this need to explain and like repeat over and
justify your identity, to justify your heritage, your identity. This constant need to justify that, I am not supportive of the government, and no, I did not escape a revolution, and I don't have this victimized story. I'm not a victim. I have agency, and the situation on the ground, sure, it's challenging, it's complex, there's a lot of grievances, but life goes on, Layla. Life goes on, and I'm interested in telling people how life goes on. I'm interested in telling people of the perseverance and strength and will and resolve of those on the ground, rather than women behind the veil, women victimized, women killed, women being held backward.
It's so reductive, right? It's so reductive. And I think the harm, I guess I'm trying to identify in some ways the harm to also recognize them and maybe mitigate against them, because I agree with you. I think the responsibility is there, and I think it's an important one. And I love the way you put it, that it is on the members of the community to take on that work. Do not allow other people to speak for you. I'm also very much like of the view, if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to. You can't complain, really, if you didn't try, at least. But with that comes all of these other elements, right? The sense of, I'm tired, like I don't want to explain anymore, or like why does the starting point always have to be, I have to correct you, I have to inform you, I have to educate you? Why can't you see this other side in the first instance? And I think I'm still figuring it out, but there is this sense of like, I have to balance myself and my time with people who I don't have to explain myself to, in order to a certain extent be able to dip into the well to do the other work. Maybe before, when I was younger, I had more more in the tank. My tank is the supplies have, receded a little bit with time, and obviously with these horrific past 2 years, it's quite difficult, but it's necessary work. So how do you fill up your cup? Like, what do you do for you in order to be able to write the way you write, to be able to keep on with the humanitarian work that you do? But more importantly, and I think, superseding that, and this is something also I'd love for like listeners to understand, because not everyone is necessarily in that space, but we are all occupying this other space where we're like from different cultures and backgrounds. And I'm sure everybody who's listening has at some point had to feel this sense of like, let me explain myself. Let me counteract this narrative that you've been indoctrinated with. Like, no, I'm not a terrorist. No, I'm not a oppressed woman. No, I'm not. What do you do? What does Tara do to kind of build up that resolve and keep going?
For the longest time, Layla, I was interested in people's recognition, right? Or approval, rather, or understanding. Okay. And I'm very proud and happy to say that I could care less at this point, and I don't care. Right. I'm going to tell the story, and I'm going to do my work in the most authentic, educated, um, forceful way. And if it has an impact, great. If it doesn't, I know I gave it my all. I know I gave 100%, and I know it, right? Because in this day and age of social media and nonsense, there's so much talking heads. There's so many people who, hijack narratives and, become experts and so on. And that was another thing that bothered me, right? Because we put the work and we're there and we know what we're talking about. And then we have to also compete with, a whole lot of noise, right? So, 2025, I think I have grown up to be the person who does not care about any noise, care any at all about, pleasing, because I know what I do comes from the most authentic and well intended place, and also entwined with hard work. And as far as what I do for myself to fill my tank, with a whole lot of cups of coffee, of course, but I do have a little dog, and she's very sweet and she makes me happy, and it's a privilege.
I know exactly what you mean. I got little Lulu, my kitten, who's 5 months old, and oh, thank goodness. The question also I always ask people on the show, your culture and what that gives you, how in terms of sort of supporting your mental and emotional well-being, from either the Iranian or the American side. And perhaps now that you've been living here long enough, you may find certain British elements, although they're not exactly known for their emotional openness over here, but nonetheless.
What I appreciate from my exposure to the American society is this sense of unequivocal communication, right? Straightforward, say it as is, do it as is. It is what it is. It's a spade is a spade. And I think I bring so much of that into my writing and the style of writing, and I say it as is. But then I bring in so much emotion, because that's what Iranian culture and Persian culture is. It's filled with emotion and literature and poetry, and I'm proud of that. And that's something that I cherish. And so trying to simplify some of the biggest issues whilst keeping true to the emotion, uh, that's hard. But I think I've learned that, from my American and Iranian um, upbringings.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's a great mix. And I think that in that connection is the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Because just explaining isn't enough, as we've, I think, come to realize in our profession as work as journalists. Like, it's actually, that only takes you so far.
Yes.
There's somewhere else you need to go to kind of get action, get movement in a way. So I think that's really wonderful that you found that. It sounds like you found your North Star and your values that kind of keep you grounded, which isn't an easy thing to do in a world that is constantly trying to divert our attention and tell us that something else matters. But I, like you, have come to realize, and it's definitely still a work in progress for me, but
Oh, for
that
sure. Thank you. Well, thank you. We will let you know how that goes. But
it takes reminding, and this is why as well, this work for me is also a gift to myself, because it does remind me when I am speaking with other people who've gone on similar journeys, or even if they're not, but they have the same thoughts and questions. And it just, at the very least, it makes you feel less alone in a world that can be
yes,
quite lonely. But more importantly, it's just also these little signs and signposts of like, yeah, this is the way, like, you're okay. And also finding literally tribes, and as we are both advocates of like grassroots, it's also about making those connections. So I'm really glad that we connected here today, and glad to have learned so much more about you, and of course the beautiful work that you're doing at Art of Hope. Um, Maybe just to cap off, where is Art of Hope planning to go next? And are there any particular programs that we could maybe spotlight?
thank you so much, Layla. I too am pleased that I had this opportunity to speak with you and your audience, and thank you for creating the space for these conversations. I appreciate you and the work you do. And as far as what Art of Hope is going to do next, I'm very keen on starting one or two programs in Syria. I'm very keen on restarting a few programs in Lebanon, and of course, continuing our work in Gaza. Um, the one thing I would say is one day, I'm not sure if it's going to happen in 2025, but I sure hope that I can take our programming to Afghanistan. So that's another place near and dear to my heart that I hope we can have some small impact. And for anyone who's interested in supporting or learning more about our work, our website is super easy, artofhopeglobal.org. And, we're grassroots. We're all about people who wanting to be forces for change and seeing the tangible result of their gift and support in action. And you can see that. So that's the driving force behind what we do.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tara.
Thank
Thank
you.
you again for your time and your wisdom and the beautiful work that you do.
The same to you. Thanks so much for having me.
You're most welcome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Third Culture Therapy. We'd love to hear from you, so get in touch with us via Instagram or leave comments on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you are listening. And please do like, follow, and share.